Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for Cloud Data Services. Just wanted to let you guys all know that you are muted, but if you have any questions during the presentation, just type them into the Q&A. I will be monitoring it and I will let Andrew know. Also, just to let you know, our presenter today is Andrew Miller here at Pure Storage. He is our Principal Systems Engineer. I'm going to let him take it from here and I'm going to mute myself, but please enter any questions you have into the Q&A and we'll get to them throughout the presentation. Thanks for joining us today.
Can you hear me all right and see the screen?
Yep, looks great.
Awesome. Thank you. So just so I'm not a disembodied voice, so it's not too distracting, I'll turn video off. But thank you everyone for joining, both the people today and the people in the future via the magic of recording. Really appreciate you being here. Andrew Miller, Principal SE with Pure Storage. I've been here about 9 months, and actually what we're going to talk about today is some of the reason that I'm here, to be honest. Customer side for 7 years, so I've lived in your desks or cubicles or offices, kind of admin to engineer to architect, everything from storage, networking, virtualization, security, all over. 8 years on the partner pre-sale side. That's SE to manager director. You wave your hands around, you make promises. If they come true, you get to come back. If they're true, you get to come back. If not, you don't. And then the last 2 years, actually, building out a technical marketing team as a remote HQ employee for actually another company based out of Silicon Valley. As I looked at Pure though and was considering some options in coming here, the what we are doing from a cloud perspective was frankly really exciting to me. And with this, I'll actually stop the video, and feel free to put it into the Q&A if you want to see my face such as it is. It's nothing. It's not God's gift to mankind, but hopefully I'm relatively presentable. And I'm coming to you. In case you've ever wondered, this webinar is brought to you from my home office in Greenville, South Carolina. So as Pure, as we've looked at cloud and at cloud data services, we've thought pretty hard kind of about the why, about what is the landscape and why are we creating what we're creating, and not just jumping into the how and the what. There's even some great stuff here from Simon Sinek, the Start With Why. It's a great 15-minute TED Talk, and if you like it, there's a bigger book about that. So we're going to start out with the why, and then we're going to move into kind of the how and the what, and we're going to take our best shot here at being a little different. We're going to do some whiteboarding via iPad as we get into the how and the what, kind of breaking down how the products work and the use cases, and a little bit of AWS, a little bit of kind of AWS education about the underlying constructs there. But starting with the why. So as Pure, as we've looked at the marketplace, we continue to see that enterprise cloud strategy is evolving, right? We've been through the hype cycle in different ways with, peak hype to trough of disillusionment. In there's been cloud first or cloud only. This conversation has matured out a good bit in the last couple of years. So we're seeing companies. I don't think there's anybody who's really still here, to be honest, at a fully on-prem perspective. Or if you are, you're trying to embrace the characteristics of moving toward a hybrid cloud, and especially even moving toward a hybrid application capability. This is really all about competitive advantage and being faster and more responsive to the business. I mean, that's where cloud started, right? At the same time, we actually see the reverse trend happening too. We have people that start from a one cloud perspective. This is where actually as Pure, a lot of our customers are software as a service companies, right? They started out, just truly in the cloud, building out software as a service on top of PaaS or IaaS. Maybe they go to multi-cloud and then hybrid applications over time. This is where you look at cloud. Cloud is at core a utility. That's one of the things in the NIST definition of cloud, right? And utilities are great in the sense that you use a little, you pay a little. Use a lot, you pay a lot. And sometimes being able to take advantage of that economy of scale, that is the cloud provider's business model, right? That is their business model. They have huge economies of scale. They can sell it to you by the drip, if you will. But in time, especially as you grow, we find that people say, I need to be able to take advantage of some of those economies of scale financially in order to be able to make my business model viable or to be able to make me competitive in the marketplace. So, even starting at one cloud, people going toward hybrid. And this, ironically, was actually the journey that we went through as Pure One. So this isn't just kind of market research. This is actually what we lived. And in that, we actually, so Pure One started out as a born in the cloud application, literally started out wholly in AWS. Over time, we pulled the customer data out to Salesforce. That just kind of makes sense, right? The customer data, Salesforce should be authoritative for customer data. Over time, as we started to move toward kind of past general reporting and logging, and we started to actually get into really using the data a lot more. This is where you see, AI and ML type stuff. If you've been in Pure One, there's some great stuff around workload simulators, simulating out when you change controllers. What does that look like? Of course, there's performance stuff in there and snapshot catalog. And then even, sorry, coughing for a second, but muting out for you. And then even getting into kind of workload modeling, like, I want to provision new workloads on the array that look like these other ones. And, we've literally got 9 billion plus events. The most recent number I've seen, I think, is 15,000 devices here. If you even look at VM analytics. So we got to the point where doing that, we couldn't do that with the underlying AWS services. And this isn't a bad on AWS, right? But we have this product called FlashBlade that has insanely high throughput and concurrency, which is what you really need for AI and ML. And we migrated part of our hot logs and AI ML train to that just because the cloud services available didn't provide, frankly, the costs that we needed to make our business model viable, nor did they provide the actual performance due to what they were under the covers kind of thing. So what we find fascinating here is that, people are starting any given company, or sometimes even any given business unit in the same company, right? Maybe starting from either side, but they're coming to a hybrid application world. And there's also some just great market research out there, such as in this case, this is from 451. The clear majority, not just because it's color coded, but it is the biggest number. And this is what you are telling the research firms. You as customers are telling the research firms, right? We're moving toward a hybrid IT environment that's on-prem and off-prem in an integrated fashion. So given that, and this is where we're past this. It's not a single cloud, it's not public cloud or bust, kind of thing. So given that, the right strategy is and, not or. Feels a little bit obvious. Sometimes a lot of the dialogue today happens around whether an app should live on-prem or it should live in the public cloud. But the reality is you need both. You need the efficiency and reliability of on-prem, and you need the agility and the innovation of the public cloud. But that's hard, right? Sometimes the simplest concepts are the hardest under the covers, right? Because you look at enterprise, it's not super cloudy. It's not where it started. The cloud was built for this totally different types of workload and architectures, right? We can talk about like 12-factor apps. You go to 12factor.net. That's a great definition of kind of cloud apps, if you will, or modern applications built that way. So and is hard. Let's expand that a little bit. So we look at that from an application architecture standpoint. On-prem, the kind of the unit of consumption there, if you will, is packaged applications on virtual machines, as well as, you often have application islands. Historically, that's because we didn't know what was going to happen when we consolidated very different tier one applications, but we didn't want to find out. We knew the only thing that was going to happen was bad things, right, if you will, kind of thing. And then, of course, on the cloud side, very different. Web scale apps, this is, containers and bare metal. PaaS services, the unit of scaling is usually more around containers or even less than that. You've got things like Lambda, which is basically like serverless computing. Of course, when we think about management and consumption, cloud side, API, everything, we probably don't even think about a GUI, and of course it's on demand. Whereas on the traditional data center side, capex and depreciation, that's the whole best day is the first day. That's the definition of depreciation. Now as Pure, hopefully if you're listening to this, you know that we already do really strong things with Evergreen to keep your Pure equipment modern over time, right? So it gets better over time instead of getting worse over time. But generally, capex and depreciation on-prem, things are more dedicated. It's more manual. And of course, because this is Pure Storage and we're thinking about this, we end up going down and looking at the storage level. So from a cloud perspective, heavily shared storage services, super simple, super scalable, but super simple. Like some of the things that you assume on-prem around the reliability and the feature sets, those things simply don't exist in the cloud, or to the degree that they do, the needed functionality is built in up at the application layer instead of down at the storage layer. So you try and pull an application across, from on-prem to public cloud, it becomes really hard. And I'm sure you've heard some stories about this. I'm thinking of a customer that I was talking to, an IT director, where they had an initiative to get everything to the public cloud. I'm not going to say which cloud provider because it doesn't really matter. In this case, it's not that cloud provider's bad, right? They moved all their applications across. They got a new CFO, and then he required that due to cost reasons, the cost was noticeably higher than expected, and the performance issues that they bring it all back. That just pains my operational soul. And this is not saying cloud good on cloud bad, on-prem good, or vice versa, right? It's just that these are different things, and the way the applications that are built on either side make different assumptions about them. So, what if? What if? Kind of dreaming a little bit. What if we could have seamless orchestration between, we could have bidirectional app mobility, but to do that you need data. You need common shared data services. Because what we believe and what we're seeing is that data and the approach and the resiliency to data makes or breaks hybrid. It dramatically influences the migration ability. Having the same APIs is critical, especially if you're going to bring an application back and forth. Having different APIs on-prem versus the cloud or vice versa, that totally stops portability and application compatibility. And of course, we often look at cloud or cloud-like services for innovation velocity, and how can we have that similar on-prem? So, as Pure, we focused on what we're calling a data-centric architecture. You'll see both this from Pure. You'll sometimes see some messaging around a modern data experience, if you will. But the goal is that we are focusing on the data, and we are trying to remove some of the traditional limitations there. That everything can be fast, but it can be shared. It's on demand and automated, while very simple, but also very secure. There's even a fun little fact here that I like to put in sometimes, that when you look at the original design of Pure, when we actually build in the encryption algorithm, because everything on a Pure array, whether in the cloud or on-prem, because we're going to get to the one in the cloud, right? It's actually encrypted as data at rest encryption. Part of the reason that we did that was originally going and looking how SSDs worked on-prem and handling wear leveling and how you distribute the data. You have to come up with an algorithm to distribute the data nicely, to kind of randomize the data distribution, if you will. It turns out that encryption algorithms are really good at randomizing data placement. That's why when you look at the data reduction and data processing pipeline inside Pure arrays, that's why encryption is built in with zero performance impact. We use it for the data randomization, and we almost kind of get the encryption capabilities for free, or maybe vice versa, depending on how you think about it. Hybrid by design, and that it is constantly improving. And this, of course, links to what we've already been doing with Evergreen on-prem and what we're bringing to the cloud. So, we're into part two. We've kind of finished the why and the landscape that we were seeing. And so what did we do as we started to think about that and where we could bring Pure capabilities? Now, this goes back to my comment of why I was motivated to come to Pure. Sometimes you look at companies, and I did this as a customer, where you say, oh, they're doing something totally different than what they did before. That's amazing, and I know they don't have any experience with it, and maybe their sales teams or engineers are like, this is a totally different thing. So as Pure, what we've done is we've leaned forward, embracing the strength of engineering we've had for the last 10 years, and how can we make that adjacent, technical adjacency, if you will, it's a concept that I love, into the cloud. So the first piece there is about building the cloud. So storage as a service in general. So we've already been doing this and providing this on-prem, but I'm going to make a promise here. Everything you see here is going to apply to the cloud side as we walk through that on the whiteboard in a minute. And we'll come back and kind of recap to, make sure that I kept that promise. So on-prem, as well as cloud, whether it's containers or VMs, it's extensive automation, an API-first platform with a lot of integrations built in. We love VMware. It's a huge amount of our workloads, but we also work very well with Red Hat and Microsoft. Then it is an API-first approach where, the protocol should not be a critical thing. We can handle that regardless. And on-prem, already due to FlashBlade and some of our object store capabilities, and PSO, Pure Service Orchestrator, which integrates in, we've actually been able to help people build web scale apps on-prem for a while. And then finally is being able to have an OpEx model, a cloud-like consumption model on-prem, and having that already so we can apply it as we bring out cloud technologies. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to actually start to talk about what Pure has done in the cloud and kind of the products, if you will, because ultimately there has to be something that you get from Pure. And with this, we will actually cut over to the whiteboard, but this is kind of recapping. There's been different assumptions for a very long time about the resiliency, the efficiency, as well as the APIs between cloud and on-prem. So with that, it is whiteboard time. And we will take a leap of faith here together as I go over and select my iPad. And usually this takes just a second for Zoom to figure itself out and cut over. But there I see it. Carla, could I just get a confirmation from you that you can still see this if you don't mind?
Yeah, your whiteboard's up.
Wonderful. It's blank, but that's what it's meant to be. So
Yes, it's white.
and we'll just say, hello. So there we go. Cool. Okay, we'll back that up. Okay, so I like how I like to walk through this. This song's maybe a little bit different, but it links what Pure has done and the strengths we've had and where we've come from with where we're going. So if you're an existing Pure customer today, or even if you're not, you've got a Pure array on premises. Controller 0, controller 1. We'll make this guy a little bigger. We'll string stuff out as we go. And in that, I always like to make sure to highlight data reduction. And you may be like, why are we starting there? Well, data reduction is the gift that keeps on giving. We're going to play this out multiple ways, multiple times as we go along. From a historical perspective with Pure, data reduction is how Pure got started, right? Taking SSDs, consumer SSDs, making them act at a resiliency level from an enterprise perspective, and being able to bridge the cost delta. So sometimes we talk to customers, and you'll see data reduction of 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, whatever it is. Sometimes it's higher depending on the application set, obviously. And we have things to model that out. But this has been part of Pure's secret to success so far already. Then, of course, we go and we think about, if I'm going to create volumes or I'm going to create LUNs, let's say, there's SQL, maybe Oracle, VMware. And I like to make sure to explore a little bit the concept of snapshots. And the reason I do this, is that snapshots on Pure, I like to call they're what snapshots wanted to be when they grow up. We'll actually back up there here. I'll just say, snapshots. We'll write that a little bit neater since we're at the very beginning of the whiteboard. So snapshots on Pure are what snapshots wanted to be when they grow up. And I've worked with snapshots on a good number of other platforms here. I'm not here to, kind of cast any aspersions on anybody, right, kind of thing. But sometimes you'd have copy on first write. There'd be for performance impact. You'd have maximum numbers that you can make. Maybe you'd overwhelm the underlying disks. You delete a snapshot. So performance things would start to go a little bit weird, just that kind of thing, right? So what we actually found was that when we were creating snapshots, this is part of the architecture from day one. And so for a lot of our customers, if they're not using snapshots, I encourage them to. Maybe the platform you came from before Pure often influences how we've used snapshots. But so often we have people, they make default policies to keep snapshots around for 3 days or 7 days or 14 days. And this kind of goes into the idea that there's nothing faster from a data restore standpoint than a metadata operation, or from a cloning, making a new test dev environment. Snapshots on Pure are mutable. You can't modify them, but you can clone them instantly. You actually get a free 24-hour snapshot. It's a get out of jail free card. Pretty cool, right? But this is one of the things that you kind of assume there's some capability like this on enterprise storage arrays. Although, of course, playing out the point that Pure snapshots are pretty strong comparatively. What we then did is we had customers who wanted to do more, right? Of course, because that's what I did as a customer. I'd always look at things like, hey, what more can I do with this? So we created the ability to archive snapshots off to NFS. We introduced this in version 5.1. We did this for $0, right? This is kind of the evergreen approach. Software is included. And to do that, what we had to do is we had to create what's called a portable snapshot format, where we encompass the whole snapshot. We'll pick one here, going out there. Deduplicated, compressed, sent out there. Sometimes this could be for longer term retention. Sometimes I would even have people who would talk about this as being, they would use the idea, or I discussed with them the idea of computeless DR. You've got the data there in a native array format. It doesn't have to be transformed. It can be brought back because, it's not just that this is, it's not just sent from one array. You could have another array down here, controller 0, controller 1, that actually reads the snapshot. Any given NFS export or a specific spot directory, even really, only one array should be writing snapshots, but multiple arrays can read off it. And of course, you get multiple arrays sending snapshots to the same NFS target. Okay, so, but what if, and we'll even kind of clean that up a little bit there because I'm going to use that spot on the whiteboard later. But then, with 5.2, again, for $0. We introduced the ability to send those to S3. You're like, ooh, we're starting to get a little cloudy. You're right. So, that could be let's just take a different volume there. This starts to get that now we're archiving into the cloud. This can be S3. This can be S3 IA, infrequent access. There's the whole 30-day thing going on there, but different tiers. I've had some customers that have said, hey, actually, I bid for projects, and then when they're done, I have to keep them for 7 years. Instead of wanting to run that through a backup catalog, like this is literally one customer. They're like, I'm just going to keep a spreadsheet, archive it off to S3, even shove it down manually to Glacier. There's a namespace change there. Okay, so just a customer example of how they chose to use the tools. I'm going to shove it down to Glacier, and then I'm just going to let it sit and rot there because I hope to never need to bring it back. And as well, this is not just a Amazon strategy. This is a multi-cloud strategy. So with 5.3, we introduced the same ability going out to Azure, right? And we do plan to continue to release services for AWS and for Azure over time. Sometimes the order will be based on engineering reasons, sometimes relative market share, et cetera, but heavily partner with both AWS and Azure, and potentially other cloud providers over time too, right? Stay tuned or ask your account team if you're curious about that. Now, so far you'd be like, that's kind of cool. That's kind of cloudy. It's getting the data in the cloud. It's not really cloudy, if you will. But so what if, and I'm sure you're thinking this if you joined this webinar, what if I could just run Pure in the cloud, right? That seems like a wonderful idea in theory. We'll kind of just draw that out here with a little bit of that's more messy than usual. A little bit of a messy cloud there, right, kind of thing. So what if I could do that? And that is something that's been discussed in the industry for a while, which is something that I find a little bit fascinating. So when you look at this idea, there are actually other companies out there. I'm not going to say who they are because I'm not trying to pick on folks, but just call out kind of industry landscape who have actually been doing this for a while or have claimed they've been doing this for a while. And the approach that they took was they ran and treated the cloud like a spot to run a virtual machine, just a VM. The catch is when you're talking about storage arrays, that actually has challenges from the perspective of availability, performance, of resiliency. And that's why sometimes when you look at some of these other products there, you'll see that they have like 1 or 2% of revenue share for their companies. And if it's that wonderful and that seamless and simple, everyone would have really adopted it, right? Kind of thing. So in that easy idea, we realized, and we actually experimented with this some, and we realized that approach would not work. Unfortunately, it's not that we didn't want it to work, but it wouldn't work. So the approach that we realized we had to take was actually similar to what we did 10 years ago when we started Pure. So this is engineering decisions that keep on giving, if you will. So what we realized we needed to do is we needed to look at Purity, which is the OS, and we needed to split it up, or can think of it that way. There's the software, and then there's software that's plus hardware. Okay, so software, that's the stuff that runs the same no matter where you run it. This would be like snapshots, replication, the UI, the API calls, that kind of stuff, right? So that runs the same no matter where you run it. But then there's a layer that's really the software plus the hardware. So we think about that on-prem. It's how we handle, in the past, SSDs and how we handle direct flash modules now. That's where we buy our own NAND from the factory kind of thing. And then we program essentially FPGAs and write that code. How we handle NVRAM for resiliency with supercapacitors. And we commit everything to RAM because that's super fast, but we always want to make sure to commit that. So we use supercapacitors, destaged to NAND in the event of a power loss, or because our power procedures literally yank the power cords, in case you power the array down. So we realized what we had to do was we had to go and look at the cloud, not just as a spot to run a virtual machine, but we had to look at it as a collection of hardware primitives. And I want to be very precise here. This is not insulting anybody. When you look at Amazon, what they say is they call these primitives. They create primitives, they give them to their customers, and they ask their customers to build really interesting things with those primitives. And they launch tons of services. You look at AWS, and there's running jokes of it's hard to keep up with everything that they keep launching and updating and expanding, all that kind of thing, right? So what we did as Pure is we started to look really carefully at the various AWS primitives and how someone might be accomplishing, block storage without Pure in the cloud, and then what are pieces that we could use there. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of an indulgence here. We're going to take a couple minute, kind of journey down some AWS 101 or 201 and what the different components are. And this will then play directly into Pure's strategy. So first, so let's do AWS here. So first we've got EC2. And this is of course compute, right? Enterprise compute service. So this is basically the virtual machine, but really just the RAM and the CPU kind of thing. You've got EBS, and EBS is enterprise. It stands for Elastic Block Store. This really started out as a boot service in AWS. That's where it started, right? It's grown and morphed a lot since then. But you're blocked, and you're like, oh, that's what I need in the cloud to run block services. Well, yes, but this is not the same as enterprise storage on-prem. For example, Amazon says that this has 4 nines of durability. There's some good stuff from Amazon documentation that says every year you should expect to lose around 2 out of 1,000 of these, right? You talk to developers, and you mentioned, hey, I'm going to store my data in EBS long term. They get a little bit queasy, right? When you look at EBS, each EBS volume can only attach to one EC2 volume, so there's no multi-attach there, and that may be coming at some point from Amazon, right? But that's what EBS is right now. As well, when you look at it, there's sometimes different types of performance and size, and they scale together, that kind of thing. And then even more, as you break it down, there's just the idea that this is a thing that people have to think about managing more consciously, and that you can end up having a whole bunch of, you can actually kind of have a whole bunch of separate ones here. When you mirror this, you can only mirror it, if you actually have a mirror, kind of like a RAID 1, you connect, 2 EBS volumes to EC2. If one of those goes offline, the whole thing goes offline. That doesn't feel very much like RAID 1. And then there's even some things about kind of the fault domain mirrored within a single fault domain, but it's within a single availability zone, so it may be even in the same rack. So I want to make clear, this is not that EBS is bad, it's just what it is, right, and how it's grown up. Even snapshots, right? Snapshots are not instant. They're more of a copy process over S3 that's incremental. So this is a good service for what it is, but it's not the same thing as an enterprise storage array on-prem. Of course, then, in storage, you often talk about S3. S3 is object storage for Amazon. So this is a slower data repository that everybody trusts. It's kind of the safety blanket you say to developers. Where's your data persisting? S3, okay? But it's object storage, So this isn't where, it's not block storage. It costs money every time that you read and write to it. Yes, every single I/O. But you get 11 nines of durability. And data can be accessed within all availability zones in a region. That goes back to that 11 nines. And because of that 11 nines, there's lots of copies of the data underneath the covers to get that 11 nines. So the idea of eventual consistency, that as you write to it, data may take a little while to show up and be consistent as it gets copied to get to the 11 nines. Response time is in the 5 to 10 milliseconds range, kind of thing. And this is sometimes more kind of like internet type response times versus data center response times, LAN versus WAN, if you will. And then you even have something called DynamoDB, which is a high performance NoSQL database, non-relational high performance database, super high availability, high performance. And if this is one of the critical services of Amazon that underpins tons of things. I had it framed me from an Amazon person saying that if DynamoDB goes offline, large swaths of the internet potentially have challenges, right? Because this is and the statement is that it won't, right? This is incredibly resilient, incredibly performant. So what we realized we had to do as Pure was we needed to go and look at the cloud based on what it was, not what we wanted it to be, but what it truly was, just like we did with SSDs 10 years ago. So along with creating dual controllers for Cloud Block Store and doing some interesting things with IO1 to handle NVRAM, how we handle the initial writes and the response time for that, we actually realized that we had to create what we called virtual drive modules. And those virtual drive modules consist of something that kind of look like our direct flash modules. You've got EC2, it's kind of like an FPGA. You're using something even called Instant Store, which I didn't mention here. Oh, it just jumped around a little bit. Instant Store, that's ephemeral storage that's connected directly into EC2. We use that for reads. EBS is actually used for kind of boot purposes and some other ones. S3 is where we persist data. To be able to handle that persistence time, we actually go On persistence time, we actually go and write things into DynamoDB to make sure that we never lose writes. That's one of the approaches we saw with some of our competitors. There were scenarios under which they could lose writes, write IO, which if you're an enterprise storage array, there's nothing more sacred than the write, well, the data, and specifically every time you send Pure a write IO, we should never lose it, that kind of thing. So what I like to go, and so that's where we went, and this was not easy to do. Okay, so I mean, I've seen slides where I know the number of engineers that worked on the product and solution engineers. I mean, where there's ranges of involvement of 50, 100 plus engineers on a slide that I've seen that had their fingers in this, because this was not easy to do. Which goes to, if you have something simple in theory, you don't see it done, it may be because it's actually really hard in practice, right? Kind of thing. There was serious engineering there. Now, if you're following along with me, you're playing the at-home game, and I appreciate. I'm watching kind of the attendance here, and everyone is staying with me. So thank you, I appreciate it. We've got about 10 minutes left. We're going to give you back some of the time for the hour as well as leave time for Q&A. So if you're playing along, you're thinking like, huh. So I need to pay Pure some money for this because we have engineering, and that is our business model, right? We charge you for valuable capabilities. That's where FlashArray has always been. It's a value product, not a commodity sell. But I also need to pay AWS for all that stuff. So how is that going to work out? Like, can I only use this for my most important applications where I really need 6 nines of availability and all the enterprise capabilities, that kind of thing? So this is where I love to explore the idea of financial headroom. And this is really, if you may remember, we started with the idea of data reduction. So data reduction is what creates the ability for this to be viable for you and not just for your top applications. It majorly expands the applicability of this. Because if you have, 3, 4, 5 to 1 data reduction, whatever that is, reduces the amount of AWS resources, and it actually creates, the financial ability to pay for the AWS resources and pay Pure too. Now, you could be thinking, well, wouldn't AWS be threatened by this? What's fascinating is that they're not. They're enthusiastic about it. They were on stage with us at Pure Accelerate to actually, endorse this and say how happy they were this exists, because AWS has seen the same thing that you've seen, the same thing that I've seen. Traditional applications, existing applications moving to the cloud, it's going to be very difficult sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes, right? So for them, they're seeing this as being able to capture a whole category of applications, expand their total addressable market into applications that need storage, that feels like enterprise storage, that has that resiliency, that has that performance, that has APIs and snapshots and clones and all those other kind of capabilities, right? So AWS is actually super, super interested in this, right? So we're going to move into use cases here. I usually kind of look at my notes just to make sure I didn't leave out any concepts here, because sometimes you get going and you're like, oh, I left out an idea, but I think we're good. So we're going to talk a little bit about use cases, and for that we'll kind of come up here. Okay, so we're going to talk about disaster recovery. We're going to talk about lift and shift. We're going to talk about, I'll call it kind of test dev, and we're going to talk about Kubernetes. So disaster recovery is often a conversation here. I think it has been for as long as cloud has been out, or any utility type approach, because DR at core is an insurance policy, and we really hope to not have to cash in that insurance policy, kind of thing. We'd prefer not to. So we're looking for ways to lower the cost of something we don't necessarily use very often while making sure it's available. So whether it's via CloudSnap, or whether it CloudSnap, that's the CloudSnap is this capability here to S3 and to Azure that we talked about. And actually, I should probably write that out there to be good in case you're following along. So CloudSnap, or it's via replicating into an existing array. So that creates the question sometimes. People like so if I'm going to replicate, and we'll just kind of make a little dotted line here to represent replication. If I'm going to replicate, how do I replicate from on-prem into the cloud? It's literally the same code. We're going back to the software that's the same no matter where you run it. Even if you want to do asynchronous or async replication, what we call active cluster, something that we include for FreeRNA arrays, we don't charge more for, which is dramatically different than our competitors and dramatically simpler too. As long as you hit the latency requirements, you can do that too. You can even do active cluster asynchronous replication. So it's the exact same process, because it's literally the same code. If we find an issue or add a capability, find an issue and fix it, we add a capability, it's the same capability, the same fix or enhancement on Cloud Block Store and on Purity. We did not fork the code at that level. only where we had to, kind of at the lower level, right, to take care of the software and hardware capabilities. Lift and shift is, of course, another one. And this is where I'm thinking of a customer here that has actually done this. They were in the Cloud Block Store beta as soon as it went GA, because this was at Accelerate about 2 months ago now, I think, a month and a half, 2 months ago. We went public with GA with this. They're actually running in production on this because this was the only way they found that they were able to get the capabilities they needed in order to be able to run, their existing applications in the cloud, the ones they couldn't refactor. Now, you may be thinking about something here that I didn't hit on yet. The way that you connect into Cloud Block Store is via iSCSI, because there's no fiber channel in the cloud, for better or worse. Right? Just that is what it is. It's not there. And as well, if you're thinking, there are sometimes discussions there around boot volumes and how you handle that, given if you follow this, you know that an EC2 instance in AWS can only boot off of EBS, Block Store. So we've seen customers and worked with them around kind of boot volume, template deployment over migration scenarios, some more automated, some manual. And there's even more solution engineering stuff that we're working on there now that we've got Cloud Block Store as it is GA and as a solid product. So lift and shift, and we have customers this is even in the first version of Cloud Block Store, building on Purity code, but the first version of Cloud Block Store, they're literally already doing this. And as well, for those of you that are thinking that I haven't mentioned Azure, we do have an announcement on our site where we announce the forthcoming public beta of Cloud Block Store in Azure, back to this being a multi-cloud scenario and goal. The next one I'd like to discuss is test dev. And this to me is actually a little bit fun because sometimes you have, let's say if you've been doing, test to, well, or you could even say it's, development to test to production, so let's kind of take as a, development to test to prod. So often what happens is you do your development work, you do things in test, you make changes, whatever you need to get things working properly in test, and then you promote into prod. Sometimes, depending on your level of automation, you may redo the changes that were done in test and prod, but I find a lot of people end up promoting into prod. So we were talking about data reduction being the gift that keeps on giving, right? So let's just, pretend that we've got another array up here. This one is on-prem, and we're replicating, to and from. So when you replicate into the cloud, this is going to be ingress, and we are only sending deduplicated, compressed copies of this, right, kind of thing. And any cloud provider doesn't charge for this. As you pull data back, but of course it still takes time, and that's where our replication being more efficient helps with the time factor. As you pull data back out, you have egress. Now, I'm not here to play an egress bogeyman kind of thing, because depending on your contract, this may be more or less impactful, but it's not zero, whatever it is. And also, it takes time, too, especially depending on the replication technology. So Cloud Block Store has a noticeable economic advantage around egress pricing or cost due to the efficiency of our data replication. Even on async, on synchronous active cluster, we do compression for active cluster replication, too. We're very unique there. But it also has a factor of time. So let's say that I have my test and dev running in the cloud, and I want to promote into production here. Unless I have a really efficient replication engine, the cost or the time may not even be feasible to promote from test in the cloud back to production on-prem, because test dev is such an awesome cloud workload. It's bursty and it's on demand. There's always more that you need there, kind of thing. And I just realized that the share stopped here. I'm not sure why, so pardon me here. Let me get that going again. I don't know if I clicked something or...
I can still see it.
You can still see it. Okay. That is odd. Somehow. Okay, my bad. Thanks, Carla. Thanks for the sanity check. and glad to know that everyone's still hearing me. I haven't been talking into a vacuum for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is. So from test dev, because test dev is such a great workload for the cloud. Now, the last one there is Kubernetes, and you may find that a little bit interesting that I'm going to talk about Kubernetes, especially as it relates to Cloud Block Store. There's a whole other section here. I decided not to, kind of break out slides for this, but if you're investigating containers, Kubernetes, there's a newer standard called CSI, Container Storage Interface. That's a plugin, basically, plugin standard for storage, because as we've gone through the evolution of container development, it started out heavily stateless. The state still had to be started somewhere. But as we got into more and more development, you start to get to the point where there's actually a state that's being stored inside containers, and you need persistent, robust enterprise storage. So we created what we call PSO, and somewhere my peer John Owings is smiling as I'm saying this, as he focuses on this in containers. Pure Service Orchestrator that helps Pure arrays natively integrate in a policy-driven, flexible way, handles split brain scenarios, etc., kind of thing into container environments. What's interesting is that is PSO layers on top of Pure Flash arrays on-prem in the exact same way that it layers on top of Cloud Block Store in the cloud. And due to our support for CSI, even something like say Amazon Farscape, for instance, which is Amazon Farscape, which is their Amazon's container service, can actually interface with this. As well, frankly, I often see that there's cloud skills in Kubernetes folks and developers that they're already comfortable with the surrounding things. Because I don't want to pretend there's not some complexity in the cloud that we don't address. Like you still need to understand VPCs and networking and your network tunnels and IP ranges and how that might be different in the cloud, right? But we take a category that before simply really hasn't existed in the cloud and offer it up to. We are seeing more use cases out there. These are some of the ones that I like to highlight, but if you've been following along, I'd bet that you can think of more that I haven't even hit on. So with that, we are going to go ahead and we're going to cut back over to the slides. So we will change our share here over to that. There we go. Okay. And Carla, please yell at me if you can't see the slide now.
Nope, you're all good.
So I referred to this before, but what I didn't cover at all on the whiteboard, frankly, was kind of payment and OpEx and consumption kind of thing. So even before we introduced Cloud Block Store, we had, well, we called it actually Evergreen Storage Service, that Pure Accelerate. We enhanced it and renamed it to Pure as a Service. The idea is that anything from Pure you can purchase, as a service. This is a true OpEx model. It even complies with newer financial regulations that have actually reclassified a whole category of leases back into being CapEx. Very short onboarding. You can be there is a term here, but it's a 12-month term, and you pay per used gig. What's fascinating is this is a single subscription that can go between Pure on-prem and in the cloud, right? In the cloud, you're only going to have an OpEx model, right? I think everyone knows that. Even if you have reserved instances or you're burning down, a pre-committed amount to Amazon, everything in the cloud is OpEx, period. But from a Pure perspective, we're not pushing our customers to OpEx. You can still continue traditional CapEx models, and that's totally fine, right? But we recognize where the market's going, and especially the fascinating ability and differentiator to give you a single contract for all of your Pure capabilities between different products on-prem and even Pure on-prem and in the cloud. So with that, we are just about done. We've walked through a good bit of the differences in the approaches, kind of the why, if you will, what we saw in the landscape. We've seen what we're introducing from a cloud data services standpoint around Cloud Block Store and CloudSnap, and how we're trying to embrace our capabilities and bring them into the cloud. It's in a way that AWS and Azure are super excited about partnering with us on, and we're excited to partner with them, right, kind of thing, in a way that's true to who we are, as well as bringing advantage and benefits to our customers they've expected on-prem, and bring those same advantages in the cloud. I think with that, Carla, we are at 43 minutes after the hour, so I feel like I've talked enough, and I'll turn it over to you for questions or for anything else.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions. Is there much difference in how Pure interfaces with each cloud provider?
Overall, no. Overall, no. So I'll say that as we look at, especially say as we get into Azure, the things that I walked through with EBS and S3 and Daimon B2B, we're looking at, I was literally in a briefing on this last week, we're looking at the components of Azure and kind of embracing them for what they are. But our goal is to provide the same experience to you, that it feels like block storage or it feels like offloaded snapshots. So your end experience is the same, and we're happy. And frankly, we're trying to be pretty open about what we're doing, so it doesn't just seem like we're making promises that are the same as everyone else makes, and they're going to not be true the same way that everyone else's promises aren't true, kind of thing. But so for you as a customer, ultimately the same experience. How we do it under the covers, we're using some different technical components, and especially, but from an easier to work with standpoint, I'm finding that more of That's almost more customer driven. If you're more focused on AWS, great. You've got contracts, you've got expertise, you've got knowledge. Azure, it can be a similar discussion kind of thing. We are finding that in general, all the cloud providers are actually very excited to work with us in this area because I mean they're pragmatic companies, right? They have a lot of developers and they're capable developers. What we bring to the table is we bring 10 years of hardened and feature-rich Purity development and being able to offer that up to our cloud provider partners and bring that into their environments is super interesting to them. So they've been very happy to work with us on this overall. Hopefully that answers the question, Tim. If it doesn't, please just put a follow up in.
Have another one for you. I have a pure flash array. How would replication work to Cloud Block Store?
Great question, and I love it because it's just fun to me to talk about, right? So when we're exploring the idea of software plus hardware and then software. So there's some of the Purity code is adapted to work with the native cloud constructs, but the upper part, if you will, of the Purity code, which includes the replication capabilities, is the exact same whether we're running on FlashArray X, our performance product, whether we're running on FlashArray C, our capacity product we announced to Accelerate, running it on Cloud Block Store. It is literally the same code, the same UI. There's even kind of a fun little note there that during the Cloud Block Store beta, we had to put something into the UI in order for actually people in the beta to know if they were on a regular physical flash array or on a Cloud Block Store flash array. Because in the GUI, you literally couldn't tell the difference.
Okay, one more that I see. Do you have any customers currently running Cloud Block Store in production?
We do, we do. So I want to be super upfront about where we are. I want to be super upfront about where we are from a timeline standpoint, right? So we started wearing Cloud Block Store quite a while ago. You can find some of the initial announcements going back a year or so on the Pure blogs, right? I'm not going to say the dates. Just whoever you go look that up and keep me honest on the dates, right? We had an extensive GA, we had an extensive beta, and it went GA as a Pure Accelerate, right? Which is back in September. Keep me honest there, Carlos. Sometimes the months run together for when I'm running around a lot. So it went GA in September, and we do already have customers running this in production. There's one that I referred to actually where it was the missing piece they needed for a lift and shift initiative. They even went into using custom deployed AMIs for the boot volumes and an AMI factory for some better management of that kind of thing. But we do have customers in production, and I would say to work with your local peer account team if you would like more details there as far as specific customers. But I don't want to pretend that it's been out for more than 2 months. We just released dot the .0.1 version of it with a couple, there's a licensing key issue that we had to adjust. Just there's inevitable continuing development there as well as development on the Azure side.
And then I see one more in the chat window. What is the difference between Cloud Block Store for FlashBlade and the replication that everyone's been eager to see released?
So I'm presuming, Ryan, that you're referring to replication on FlashBlade because that's definitely where I hear people saying there's eagerness to like, I want it. So this is Cloud Block Store as it is today, right? Which is our first kind of pure entire product in the cloud. Cloud Block Store as it is today is actually I'll just go over here to the ending kind of slide. As it is today is Flash Array, if you will, in the cloud. So we do not have today a version of Cloud Block Store that is for the FlashBlade equivalent, if you will. I don't know if we call that Cloud Object Store or something else that feels like a FlashBlade name. Because FlashBlade, for those who don't know on the call, is very high performance, all flash object and file storage. Not targeted at general purpose home directories, but targeted at rapid restore and EDA and analytics and that kind of stuff, right? Kind of thing. So we did also announce at Accelerate and talked about that we are in late beta for replication on FlashBlade. That is both for file and for object. And I would actually say to reach out to your account team if you'd like to get a further specific update on that. There's some pieces there that are potentially NDA as far as just like the exact exact timelines and some other details, but we're talking publicly about it now as of Accelerate, and it's coming out very, very soon. Even I know in some cases where it's a needed feature, for certain scenarios, we've been able to provide kind of timeline guarantees where it's needed for a customer. That's always done with caution, and we always make sure to dig in. But mentioning that detail as it is truly very close. I love the question though, Ryan. And there was even one comment today that we have a 27. I believe I'm reading this right from someone on the call here. There's 27 production instances of Cloud Block Store in Skyline as it is right now. Sometimes that may be one customer deploying more than one, kind of thing. And Skyline's one of our internal, it's one of our internal trackers. So 2 months in, I'm actually pretty happy with that number because there have been a lot more POCs and kicking the tires than that. I think I've done this presentation in Whiteboard 20 to 30 times now in the last couple of months because there's a lot of interest.
Okay, here's a question that's in the Q&A. What type of efficiencies like dedupe and compression can we offer on Cloud Block Store? Is it the same as on-premise?
Spot on, spot on. So we look at again, kind of a little similar to the replication question, right? So we look at the data reduction pipeline in FlashArray on-prem. It's the exact same data reduction pipeline that's in Cloud Block Store. Whether we're replicating, the reduced data, or as it's coming in, we're reducing it. So if you're an existing Pure customer, you can literally look on your array, you can look in Pure 1, wherever you like to see your data reduction numbers. And if you're running using that same data in Cloud Block Store, you will get the same data reduction. That, of course, as we talked about, helps a lot with kind of the financial headroom idea, right? That if you're trying to think about, I need to pay AWS for resources and I need to pay Pure because Pure for Cloud Block Store, the data reduction is a critical item that helps make that financially viable.
Does anyone have any other questions? All right, looks like we're clear on the questions. And I just wanted to take a minute to thank Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us. And for all of you that took time out of your day today, if you have any questions, please reach out to us directly and we'll answer them the best that we can. Hope you all have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.